Today on TimesCast, thousands of Somali refugees arrive in Kenya seeking food, water, and medical assistance. In Amman, Jordan, riot police beat protesters and journalists to break up peaceful demonstrations. And the United States formally recognizes the opposition leaders in Libya as the country's legitimate government.
Here I am standing at the gates of Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and the people around me have walked literally weeks to get here. Recently, there's been a horrible drought, and many people here have come because they've run out of food and water in Somalia. Aid workers are saying that this is the worst drought they've seen for 60 years, and more than 1,000 people per day come right here for help. Some of them have been attacked by militias along the route. Others have seen their children die right in front of them. There's very little rain in this part of Africa right now, and as a result, animals are dying, and many people here are pastoralists, and once all their cows and goats and camels die, they have nothing to survive on. But life in these camps is not easy. It's very humiliating and dehumanizing for people to come here. They're essentially warehoused, they're fingerprinted, they're photographed, they're given a number, a little card for food, for their rations, and then they're told to go out and live in the bush.
But because the camps were originally designed for 90,000 people, we're now creeping to 380,000 people. And predictions continue up to maybe even 500,000 in the next few months. So what we're seeing is that there's no place for people to live, and so they're squatting ultimately on the outskirts of the camp.
The United Nations recently built a new camp called EFO 2 to house more refugees. It can house something like 30 or 40,000 people. But the Kenyan government does not want them to open it because they're afraid that the refugees will come here and they'll never leave. Aid workers predict the situation is going to get worse, that 1,000 people are going to continue to arrive here every day, and the numbers are going to swell to over 500,000 soon.
In a rare show of force in Jordan, police officers beat protesters to disrupt demonstrations.
Dozens of riot police officers broke up a peaceful protest in Amman, Jordan today. The protest started after Friday prayers. When the protesters reached a square where they were planning to hold a sit-in, dozens of police officers charged into their gathering. They beat several protesters with wooden clubs. Several journalists who were covering the protest, including myself, were also beaten. The journalists were given bright orange vests at the beginning of the protest to distinguish them from the protesters. When we came, there weren't any orange vests available, so we went to the protest without them. I was trying to film some of the clashes with my cell phone camera. The officers told me to stop filming. I told them I was a journalist, and then the officers started to hit me with the wooden clubs. The protests in Jordan have been going on for months now, so they occur every Friday since January. They haven't been as large or as intense as elsewhere in the Arab world, but they have continued. Today represented one of the few times that the protests have resulted in violence. The protesters are at a moment when they're trying to figure out how to move forward, because these protests, though they occur every Friday, they seem to be fairly limited in scope. They go on for a couple of hours and then they end. It's not clear why the protests resulted in violence this time around. Today they said they would hold a sit-in, which is illegal. That marked a different tactic by them. At the same time, the police response was fairly overwhelming, seemed to reflect the government's fears that the protest movement will grow. Though the numbers of protesters have not risen dramatically, the persistence of the protests suggests that the complaints are not going away anytime soon.
At a meeting in Istanbul, the United States joined more than 30 nations in formally recognizing the rebel leadership in Libya as the country's legitimate government.
This is Stephen Erlanger of the New York Times reporting from Paris. Today's decision to recognize Libya's main opposition group, which is called the National Transitional Council, as the legitimate governing authority in Libya, means that the rebels should be able to have much faster access to millions of dollars in Libyan assets that have been seized from the Gaddafi regime by Western governments. It's also likely to mean that they have more opportunity to buy weapons and even to buy oil. There's much discussion in the West of how to make this transition happen and end the war, which is very expensive. The French have been leading the conversation, but not everyone agrees. Today's decision is designed to increase the political pressure on Muammar Gaddafi to leave, but parallel to that is a new thinking, perhaps, on the part of the countries fighting him, that perhaps they could live with Gaddafi remaining inside Libya so long as he gives up all authority. That discussion, which is controversial among some members of the coalition, including the Italians who oppose it, is a reflection of the difficulty of driving Gaddafi out of power inside Tripoli. And now, after so many days of bombing, it's still not clear that the people inside Tripoli are going to stand up and pull Gaddafi down.